our guiding question for session one is really the question on engaging and motivating our students. And I know if you're here, you've been teaching, and each of us has something to share about how we have motivated or how we have engaged our students. And that's where we want to bring in really the group discussion. So think about maybe just one of for you, it's like something that you've done, like you felt that, oh, I really engaged my students, or I really motivated by doing X. And then to try and see, how is this connected to anything that we've heard here? So we want to make that connection to the lecture, to our own lived experience, is this connection. And then this is where, originally we're going to split it up, but we want to keep this down just one, just for time, because we'll be splitting up anyway for the discipline. But for now, as a group, I'll actually put in the whiteboard, and I'll ask Arlene and whoever to either write as we facilitate our discussion on, to try and summarize it so that we can take note of our sharing and then come back to saving this, this takeaway. Yes. So if you can't make the two connections right away, just think about last semester. Fall is easy to connect to. What for you was the thing that you felt like, yeah, when I did this, my students were really engaged? That big question.
I can start because I looked at this material before, so I have more time to kind of marinate and think about it. The first thing after watching this and going into more depth as to how the brain works and the importance of connecting and creating a social network is that the first week of class, I really spent a lot of time talking about the plasticity of the brain, but at the same time talking about the importance of relying on each other and creating a community of learners. A community of learners where we can be critical without being disrespectful. We can challenge each other, and that's going to make us better and make us learn better. And at the same time, a community where they feel like I'm on their side. When you come in here, I'm on your side, and I'm rooting for you to do really well.
So we'll just as what you've been doing, trying to really take it down to. So you felt that you were most engaged with your class on the first week when you did what?
So I felt like I was most engaged when in the first week, when they got to learn about the plasticity of the brain, and when they got to when I got to know them, who they are and where they're coming from, and they got to know me.
Oh, so that whole getting to know
interaction is, I feel like it primes them to be in a situation where they feel safe, where they can learn, where that community begins.
Okay.
So
that's one concrete for you, one engaging activity for you. Yeah, awesome.
I think going back to the TED Talk about people needing to feel safe, one of the best ways to make teenagers feel safe is the routine. So before you make that personal connection with them, for me, starting at the same exact time every time, ending at the same time. So then students aren't sitting there going, well, we finished early last time. I wonder if we're going to finish early this time.
Yeah.
Starting with a similar activity every time. Those types of things so that you're reducing uncertainty. And that can build the environment where you can make a personal connection then and start to build a better learning environment.
I think it's very important to spend the time getting to know these students in the classroom, the ability to connect, because it's a strange environment for them.
So this is your experience in the high school?
Yes.
So how did you do this? How did you spend the time to get to know what specific?
I guess going back to what was said, spending that first few weeks of classes connected, each and every one getting to know each other better.
How did you do it? I guess I'm thinking of the specific approach that you tried out to get to know. We're digging deep into the how do we do this? In your business,
Business, yeah.
business.
Yeah.
So let's connect it even to like your class. In your business 101 class in Malden, was there something that you did specifically to make this happen?
I guess it's more getting rid of these surface, the surface introduction, personal introduction, but going deeply to understand where they're coming from. What are some of the things you as an instructor can do to make them very comfortable in the class? An environment where they can feel vulnerable and not judged about it.
So a lot more discussion about who they are.
Discussions about who they are, being able to share, even if it's not in the class, but feel comfortable coming to you and sharing their personal, struggles or, success stories with you, knowing that they're not going to be judged based on that.
I start off each class and each semester with a questionnaire, like a needs analysis, to understand like who they are, where they're coming from, what their language backgrounds are, and then just kind of some additional information like their interests, so then I can incorporate maybe some of that into the lessons. And I have them work on it together, so one person will ask the other person the questions and write down their answers, because I use a lot of group work and
Pair share.
yeah.
Share.
So that way
Yeah.
they get comfortable with like sharing early on, and they kind of can build that community in the classroom.
So you do pair share to get the students comfortable with the idea of sharing
Right.
with a larger group.
But then I collect the information, so then I can see this information about them. So
Yeah,
I
to
get
know.
to know more about them, and then they get to interact with each other as well.
Yeah, it's good one. Francis.
Yeah. Just wanted to add something to what Justice was saying. Spending time with them and getting to know them better.
So this is in a math class.
This is in a math class
right?
with different students.
Yeah.
And one thing that probably I do to get your attention is sharing my experience with them as an international student.
Okay.
First.
Yeah. So sharing something about who
Something
you are.
about who I am. Because you have these international students who do not even know how to connect with their instructors. Or to me, when I came here, it was a taboo for me to go to an instructor and tell him I did not understand what you taught in class.
Yeah.
No.
It's,
I didn't know how to use the office hours.
yes.
And a lot of resources that were available that I could have tapped into. Well, I was successful, but I could have been more successful if I had used some of these things here. So when they get to know, that is good, and that's when they also open up and tell you that, this is what I'm going through, and what can I do, where can I get help, some of these things. So sharing your experience too. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're an international student or not.
Yeah. Sharing your
They can
personal
connect,
experience.
yeah.
Samira.
Yes, what I like to do because is the culture. So in my French class, usually I like to have them to watch a video of French stereotype, and I have them to compare their own culture. And I noticed that they're more open, comparing, sometimes even shocked to hear some stereotype that they have about French people. And I feel like they get really close and want to learn more and share more of their own experience. And sometimes they even have some misunderstanding about the culture, the way we see each other. And and I love this activity every time when I do that.
So I'm just trying to see if I'm phrasing it right. So you actually allow them to build, to talk about the stereotype.
Yeah.
And allow themselves to be, said, it's like usually you don't want people to know, that you're thinking this stereotype.
Yeah.
You allow them to do it.
Yeah, because sometimes I don't know anything about the culture, and I think to be really kind of like a bond between the student and the teacher, I think is to have all this kind of image that we have about different culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's something that I like it because I'm really open. I even tell them, don't worry, I won't be offended. You can say anything you want.
Yeah.
So they like this thing, like being like really comfortable.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, yeah, Ken. Yeah.
Well, I think it's really important to try to give them a chance to see that their point of view is important. And so, so that, and that has to do with, cutting down on teacher talk and letting there be student talk. And a really good structure for that, I found, is the thing some people call Congo line, some people call speed dating, but where they line up and you pose a question, and 2 by 2, everybody talks about it at once. And so, and it gives and it means that you're not just calling on one person or even just working in small groups, everybody's talking. And then you also then rotate with each new question, so students get to know each other better, and they might make connections that just the accident of sitting hadn't done. But it does a couple of things, but mainly it's a chance for them to, for everybody to talk. And I think that that's very important, and it tends to bring people out a lot better.
So it's great. We're seeing a lot of this is in the beginning, right? It seems like it. But when we think about the idea of engagement, we really are talking about 16 weeks, right? So how do you do it for I guess, to move us to maybe in the middle of the semester? How do you keep this momentum? Because we worry about it in the beginning, because you want to create the atmosphere, I guess to connect it to what Natasha was saying, it's all about because we're feeling. So we're addressing the feeling in the beginning of making a safe environment, and we've done all of this with these examples that everybody has given. Let's push it to the middle of the semester.
I was still, this is primarily what, this is all from Dr. Johnson. I'll just share what he does in his class, which I think have really worked tremendously in his learning community seminar. The ability to open the class, the first few minutes of the class, for students to share. So it's an open session where you're not being judged. So the first few minutes is, every individual talking about how your day was, how your week was. So just sharing, whether you were in class or not in class, sharing how your week was. So sometimes a student not being in class that day might have gone through a traumatic or a bad day or a week. But sharing that may also give other students the ability to say, these are some of the things that you can do to help you. Or these are the resources that you need so you can get the help you need. So it engages the students knowing that every individual in that class really cares about what I'm going through.
And this is every single meeting.
Every single meeting.
The first 15 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good strategy. Yeah.
Well, similar to what Justice stated, the whole idea of getting to know the students, it has to continue. It doesn't necessarily have to be every class, but often enough. Even if it's every other class, you meet twice a week, you may do it once per week over the course of the 15 weeks. And that breaks down this hierarchy between the faculty and the students. So you start moving sort of to this place whereby the sharing that takes place, you don't lose your authority per se, and you don't lose respect per se, but the dynamic in the dialogue between the students sort of, it moves from this layer to this layer, and they feel more comfortable sharing certain things that they would otherwise not share. What they're not willing to bring up in the class, they're willing to bring up in a safer space, one-on-one with the faculty. So that's one thing I've found to be helpful, and it just makes the process so much easier.
Great, yeah. And this now are examples in the middle of the semester. Other examples from the middle to the end of the semester that you feel continue the engagement. How many of you do projects? Sort of like your major project at the end. And do you feel that project contributes to at least some kind of continuous engagement?
Yes.
I want to share a bit of a project.
Yeah, well, with my statistics class, I usually assign the project probably 7th or the 8th week after completing some finished chapters. And then I split the class into groups of 3 or probably 4.
Yeah.
And then they choose a topic. Of course, I have to guide them with that. And then we get the data. And then what they actually do is they kind of, you're supposed to use what has already been taught in class to analyze your data.
Analyze your data.
Yeah, and then through that you get to know those who are lazy, because sometimes there's kind of people from fighting within the group. I don't want to work with that person.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, out there, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
You'll be asked to work with some people. Some of them will be working with you, others will be sitting back doing nothing. That doesn't mean the work must not be done. So with time, they get to meet even beyond the classes, outside of class.
Okay.
Some of them were telling me that they have That's this one where they see their faces and talk.
The webcam?
FaceTime?
They FaceTime? They
No, no,
FaceTime?
Skype.
They Skype.
They
to
Skype.
yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I haven't even thought of that.
Yeah.
And last semester, one of the groups developed I don't know whether it's an application. They were to go out and ask students questions.
They were doing
questionnaire.
survey. They were surveying.
So the surveying, they had an application and they sent that to their fellow students.
Oh, wow.
So like, wow, I never even thought of that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was so excited that students were so engaged in their class, so were interested in whatever they were doing.
Mhm.
And I believe that does not necessarily even cover things in class, but even beyond what you can even imagine. And it's beautiful.
I think that's a good example of you sort of like you create an activity and they go way, way beyond what's like, oh my God, they're doing this. Yeah. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is, these students who are motivated or are actually engaging. What about those who are, coming late, eating in class, or sleeping? How do we engage them? How do we motivate them?
How do we bring them back in? Good, yeah.
Keep creating context for why they're doing what they're doing. So talk about what the next step is going to be for them. So if they're doing English 111, putting it into the context of their degree, even if they're an engineering major. Next you're going to take 112, or if you're very interested in psychology and they want to know maybe the next level of psychology isn't available to them, but maybe you talk, and this was the case for us this semester, we're offering sociology now at Chelsea High next semester, so making that link to another part of the social sciences to get them beyond just that classroom, but where does it fit into where they actually want to go? Because we have to make it really, really practical for them about why are they even there in the first place.
And then and this actually will be, yes.
I use worksheets for each chapter. So if the students do not do the work in class, that after the day when going to home need to finish the work. So it's their choice.
Yeah.
Usually if they try not to work and understand that after they did, it will take them more time to finish the work at home, they start working.
So you're encouraging them by doing the worksheets in class.
In class.
Otherwise, you still have to finish it. You end up bringing it
I
home. So
just tell them that this will be part of their grading.
okay.
It's about 30% class activities.
Mhm.
And I give them a choice. I encourage them to work in groups. If somebody wants to be so, it's okay.
Yeah. That's an
So,
option. That's a
Yeah.
good one. Yeah. So
Yeah, they
because
give
you
these
do
options.
math, right? You're doing
Yeah,
math.
it's
So
not
there's
math.
something about practice. I saw this sign in one of the professors in the math department. Well, it's like, I think what's practice in how to be successful in math in like 20 different languages, and the word was practice. Which is like, I mean, there's no shortcut. I know there's no shortcut, especially in the math. You develop the skill, right? And then, but let's take it to what you're saying, Austin, about how to, for them, and I think this is a good segue for the next one because we'll talk about the disciplines, right? But just to sort of like wrap it up, are there other things? So we talked about the beginning, and I think we focused a lot on creating the atmosphere in the beginning. Did a little bit about, like, some continue the getting to know and allowing, giving space within the class for every class meeting for some professors or every other class meeting to reveal something of themselves or continue to reveal something of who they are and what they're bringing into the class as a way to get you through weeks 3 to maybe 12, and then from the halfway point to the end, doing for some projects as a way of seeing either connections to the beginning or how all your things that you've learned from the beginning feeds into what you can produce at the end. Before I close up, is there any other thing you'd want to add?
I just add one thing. I was listening to Francis, and in the past, when I did this particular project, I used to start at the midpoint. And I realized that the students felt that they had a lot to do from midpoint all the way till the end. So what I do now is after week 3, that's when I start the assembling of groups and slowly begin to scaffold the process for the group. So they begin to sort of work on, you know, the responsibilities, the structure, who's going to take on X, Y, and Z. And as we get closer to that midpoint, then they really jump into the bulk of the work. So I start a lot earlier so that they have enough time to sort of focus on the project. And that lends itself to a lot of discussion, a lot of interaction, and just as briefly, it allows me an opportunity to actually check in within the group and also with individuals to see how the process is going. And I put most of my weight on that major group project.
Yeah, but you scaffold it throughout,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
You make it. And I guess I'll ask Megan, and sorry, I'm putting Megan on the spot, right? Because for some, the end semester project might be your community engagement project. It might be a one-shot deal, it might be a whole semester, you tell them. But normally, what is it that we do? We get our students to commit by which week? For a full 15 service running
so
project.
students normally do do some type of service or are involved with a nonprofit as a volunteer. We usually like to get them to commit usually by week 4 or 5 so that they then have 8 weeks building relationships with that nonprofit, just because of so much of it is making sure that they feel comfortable in that space and really learning how to negotiate their roles as volunteers and making mistakes and feeling good about the end product. So yeah, usually around week 4 to 6.
Yes. So I guess that's connecting it to how early do you introduce a project that will extend to be your major project until the end of the semester. Gives you something more concrete with a community engagement project. So I guess do we want to connect, I guess for the last 5 minutes, anything of what we've heard here connect specifically to what we've learned about the adolescent brain and the adult brain?
Well, I'm not sure it connects to that.
Yeah.
But to follow up, I think one of the things that's exciting at the end of the semester is that you're finally doing things where all the scaffolding's removed. And so they are much more thrown into can they demonstrate what they have learned and they've challenged, and that should be a very exhilarating thing, and it is for many of them.
So the idea for the adult brain, novelty, complexity of activities wherein you come up with your projects.
However you've guided them there, now they're getting a chance to demonstrate.
To do it, demonstrate, yeah. So for me, that's the connection for a big one. Yeah.
I guess when we're talking about adolescents, the whole the frontal lobe and the reasoning and planning, they're kind of like lacking those skills. Scaffolding really helps with that, and especially like structure, like you're saying, start the class the same way every day so they know what to expect. So that kind of really helps model kind of maybe some things that they are missing.
Any last point?
I think, to Paul's point really quick about the ones that are not engaged at all, it's really important to try and figure out why they're not connecting to the material. We had a feedback session last week, and Amparo Hernandez, who taught Math 093 at Chelsea High, was giving word problems about airplane acceleration, and to a group of teenage Central American immigrants, they've never been on an airplane. It's not real to them at all. So we talked about it a little bit in the article that Natasha gave us. Is like it needs, and it's the same for the adults too, I imagine, trying to find a way to still connect with them even if they're feeling totally disengaged.
So it could be the car. It could be the acceleration of the car without actually...
Right, just switching it up slightly, but
context.
The teenagers that I work with will completely shut down if there's just that slightest gap. Especially if they think they're different from everyone, where likely they're exactly the same as everyone.
So I guess my last point, back to just to close it up, I guess my big takeaway from Natasha sharing was this whole idea of the feeling. And I think we all latched onto that. Did I get the sense right? Because almost all our suggestions was about making that safe space, especially the first few weeks of class, because the feelings matter more than anything for the learning to happen.